is now destroying our country. But at the same time, it turns out that only the defenders of Ukraine can liberate the Russians. It's as if we're living in a parallel reality. We have talked about the losses of the Russian army, and I also want to mention what Russia resorts to because of such enormous losses. They are actively recruiting foreigners to participate in the war against Ukraine, and according to the Ukrainian Coordination Headquarters for the Treatment of Prisoners of War, at least 18,000 people from 128 countries and unrecognized territories have fought or continue to fight as part of the Russian armed forces. Of these, 3,388 have already been killed, at least that's the official statistic. But their names, by the way, are verified. Ukraine knows who they are. And so, despite the fact that Russia generally does not acknowledge its massive losses, we have our own official statistics that reflect reality. And as we know, the real numbers are much higher because it takes time to verify the data. What does such active recruitment of foreigners indicate? And in general, to what extent can Russia somehow cover up the huge losses it is currently suffering at the front by using foreigners?
We'll take those same North Koreans who are now entering the Russian labor market, which has a shortfall of about 4 million, maybe even more workers. That's why these problems are becoming obvious in the economy as well. There are no one to work in the factories accordingly. And the factories themselves are already shutting down because the economy can't withstand the strain of war, so they have to be replaced by someone. You see, North Koreans have come in handy not only in the Kursk region, and today, as Russia proudly declares they are engaged in demining, we have evidence of cases where North Koreans, among other things, they work as crews launching UAVs, and now North Korean trainees, Kim Jong-un's protégés, are also appearing at Russian factories, making up for Russian losses. By the way, when we talk about losses and these 18,000 recruits, so-called recruits because they're actually mercenaries, they're not always, to put it mildly, ready for combat, but still, the Russians don't see them as allies, they just see them as cannon fodder. Accordingly, they are herded into the Russian Federation by any means necessary and then sent to the front. Everyone understands perfectly well that this is a one-way ticket. There's another aspect to consider here regarding replenishing losses. The losses are indeed significant. Take, for example, the Gulyaipole direction, which today is one of the most difficult, where unfortunately the Russian army currently has significant advances, in part because there is so much of this cannon fodder. So, in fact, today we're talking about the fact that the same 5th Combined Arms Army of the Russian Federation, according to some estimates, has lost about, well, in terms of units, 1.5 to even 2 full Russian divisions. These are large numbers. That's why the advance on Gulyaipole is slowing down today. It's not because the Russians have changed their plans there. No, they still have a plan. Obviously, they do. They're trying to keep up the momentum they tactically gained on the battlefield. However, they have to carry out some regrouping because Pokrovsk has drawn significant forces to itself and doesn't allow them to maneuver their reserves. Returning to the issue of replenishing losses. Yes, these are mercenaries from different countries. We're talking about how Russia is now very actively at an accelerated pace trying to send people to the front, including Ukrainian citizens who, for various reasons, are on the temporarily occupied territories. In this regard, of course, they're ahead of everyone else in the world. Our peninsula, Crimea, is temporarily occupied because the occupation there has been ongoing since 2014. Accordingly, the social composition of Crimea has changed a bit. Nevertheless, 35,000 Ukrainian citizens from there have already been conscripted. That's actually a large number. Accordingly, today in Kherson region, the temporarily occupied part, as well as Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk region, Luhansk region, Ukrainian citizens are also being taken from there to make up for losses. Because despite the fact that Russia's mobilization resource is indeed large in terms of population, it is, however, low-quality material as a result. And again, everyone has to be caught after all, and not everyone can be rounded up today, even though the Russian authorities, as you can see, have tried. They have now created all the legal foundations so that there can be mercenaries, so that Ukrainian citizens can be taken, and accordingly Russian citizens who are on the territory of the Russian Federation as well. Russia is working very actively in this direction. However, thanks in part to the information countermeasures taking place in Ukraine on the Russian-Ukrainian fronts, this information is reaching even the depths of Africa. This probably also affects the fact that the quality of these recruits is not very high. Probably the Russian army is not recruiting the number of recruits and mercenaries today that it would like to, but losses need to be replenished. Look, there are 18,000 mercenaries, but they lost about 20,000 in the Gulyaipole direction alone, and that's just one combined arms army.
A few weeks ago, when the Pokrovsk campaign first began, many military and political observers and analysts were not so much worried or concerned that the Russians would somehow manage to slip into Pokrovsk itself, but rather that there was a significant and very real threat of a possible encirclement developing which could have serious consequences. Of Myrnohrad and our units, the defenders of Myrnohrad, as well as some of the Ukrainian armed forces troops located further south. This whole campaign has been going on for several weeks now, I repeat, and the defense forces in Pokrovsk have been holding back the enemy quite successfully. But right now, how logical is it, how reasonable is it to say that there is a threat of our units being encircled in positions south of Myrnohrad?
I think in answering your question, we need to consider several basic points, in my opinion. First, the defensive operation of our units in Pokrovsk, in the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad agglomeration, is still ongoing today. Most importantly, the command is, of course, considering all options that help preserve and should help preserve the lives of our soldiers. These scenarios are also being treated as a priority. And accordingly, today everyone must clearly understand that the country's military and political leadership, as well as the command, are considering the most, let's say, negative possible scenarios for how events might unfold. I emphasize possible scenarios. Although you're absolutely right here, this hot phase has already been going on for several weeks, even though in reality it has been ongoing in Pokrovsk since last year. So the most difficult scenarios for the development of events are being considered. This is more accurate, and the readiness of units to act according to these signals, these commands that may be given. Today we see that the defense of Pokrovsk is holding. The defense of Pokrovsk, including the northern lines, is today repelling enemy attacks as well. The enemy is trying to infiltrate the northern part of the city, where most of our units are located. On the other hand, in the southern part of Pokrovsk, there are locations today where our units, the Ukrainian Defense Forces, are also engaged in firefights. And in these direct battles today, the Ukrainian Defense Forces have the advantage. Our troops are fighting well and are destroying quite a lot of the enemy. The situation, yes, remains difficult, but I want to emphasize once again that various scenarios for the development of events have been worked out today. No one will tell you the details, I think, until the war is over about what is happening and how, because this concerns the security of military operations. But the most important thing is that all our people stay alive, that everyone returns. This is the most important thing we can say for today. And the defensive operation continues both in the southern parts of the city. The main focus is in the north, and of course to prevent the encirclement of Myrnohrad. There are also possible scenarios here, but we probably won't discuss them live on air. And I hope that these scenarios won't be easy for the Russian army either.
Let's talk about what's happening in southern Ukraine. In the Kherson region, the Russians tried to push Ukrainian defenders out of their positions near the Antonivsky Road and rail bridges. This was reported by the spokesperson for the Southern Defense Forces, Vladislav Voloshin. He also noted that the Russian occupiers launched strikes with as many as 40 air-launched missiles on the village of Otradokomenka. It is located on the right bank of the Dnipro River. Voloshin also added that the Russian army had been actively shelling Kherson with artillery the day before. But of course, these attempts are not being made for the first time. They keep trying there again and again, but nevertheless, they have not achieved any success. What can they actually do now? What can the Russian occupiers actually accomplish in southern Ukraine? What are these attempts for? Is it to draw away forces? Or do they really think they can achieve some kind of success there?
Well, probably what can they do? They can create yet another fake story, like the one where the Russians supposedly shot down our ATACMS missiles that struck the Baltimore airfield in the Voronezh region. You know that story, when even the Z propagandists said, "That's not how you make a movie, this film is fake. Even Mosfilm wouldn't shoot it like that." Accordingly, such things pop up from time to time. Videos claiming that Russian tricolor flags are appearing on the right bank. Honestly, I've already lost count of how many such attempts there have been, So the Russians heavily accompany their actions with information campaigns, especially regarding Kherson and the right bank. It's purely terror against the civilian population, because, well, they haven't had any real success. They are being held back, just like our Dnipro River holds them back, and so do the defense forces operating on the right bank and in other locations as well, including the right bank. This includes the islands too. Some of them are now fully under the control of the defense forces, for example. I won't name these islands, of course, but nevertheless, this has happened and continues to happen. That's why today, once again, the Russians are maneuvering a lot on the left bank in particular, presenting some of their actions in a certain way as preparations for crossing the Dnipro, for a river crossing, for building a crossing point. In reality, this is not happening. They are trying to deceive our local residents, our citizens, who quite possibly could somehow pass relevant information to the defense forces. And as for the Antonivsky bridges, there's something almost suicidal about the Russian side's actions here, because they stubbornly keep pushing into these positions, but as you know, it always ends very badly for them. So it's clear that the enemy, once again, is accompanying all these actions with an information campaign. Well, let's at least recall just a few days ago, there were more claims about how Kherson would be captured, then Mykolaiv, Odesa, and so on. And the main thing is the terror. Yes, we see that it's coming from the Air Force, from artillery even now. After yet another strike in Kherson, a high-rise building is on fire. The terror, as I already mentioned, cannot be commented on. We simply need to respond to it by eliminating the terrorists. That's all there is to it.
Sergei, thank you.